We go to the Sea-Fisheries Miscellaneous Provisions Bill, second stage. Now, when last we were dealing with this, Deputy John Brady was next to speak. So Deputy Brady is with us.
Thank you, Count Corla. And just before I start, it's unfortunate Minister McConaughey himself isn't here to listen and partake in this debate, and I think that probably speaks volumes as to the regard in which he holds the fishing community, and the fact that this bill is being rammed through without.
So will you give way to the Minister to make a point of order?
The Minister is at another event. He is en route here, and he will be here. And as you know, there's a transcript as well. So the Minister will read back on the transcript. So let's your games and focus on the.
Well,
I'm
glad to hear the Minister will be here, and hopefully be here for my contribution, Minister, because I think it's important. Whilst this bill is being rammed through, despite the opposition from all the main fishing representatives groups, and fishermen are yet again being told what to do rather than being consulted and being listened to in order to find the necessary compromises that need to be found. And in my time here this afternoon, Count Corla, I just want to outline my serious concerns with regard to how the Minister and this government actually treat the fishing community. And I want to make reference specifically to one case, and it's a local fisherman in my own constituency of Wicklow, and it's CJ Gaffney and the Gaffney family, and how they've been mistreated by this Minister and this government. And it revolves around the purchase of a vessel by Mr. Gaffney, CJ Gaffney, back in 2007, the Mary Kate. And CJ Gaffney spent massive amounts of money in purchasing this vessel. It was purchased in good faith. It was deemed fit for purpose by several surveys and passed as seaworthy by the Marine Survey Office, Minister. It was subsequently found to have a very serious stability issue, and that was identified by CJ Gaffney when the boat nearly capsized when he was out in the seas. And subsequent tests revealed that there was in excess of 20 tonnes of unaccounted steel contained within the vessel. Now, Mr. Gaffney and his family spent huge amounts of money trying to rectify that serious flaw within the boat, a flaw that had not been picked up on, that had been deemed as seaworthy. They shortened the boat, they tried to address all of the issues. Unfortunately, money was then, hard to come by, and the banks intervened. Now, since that time, the family have experienced serious difficulties, both in terms of their own mental health, their own well-being, their own welfare, and particularly financially as well. And your own party leader, the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, actually 10 years ago sat down with this family in Arklow, in the Arklow Bay, whilst he was in opposition, and stated that his hands were tied because he wasn't in government, but if and when he did find himself in government, this was an issue that he would give serious attention to and consideration to. Your own Minister McConaughey, is also very aware of this particular situation, because he has also spoken to the Gaffney family. And what the family are asking for is compensation, because through no fault of their own, they have ended up with this mess, a mess that was signed off on, and they are seriously now out of pocket as a result of that. And this has been brought up within the EU as well, Minister, and indeed it's been backwards and forwards with different MEPs, both from Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin, have all raised it in fairness to them. And correspondence back from the European Commission to Fine Gael MEP Sean Kelly quite recently, and I just quote this because it's very interesting, because it says, in terms of addressing the loss that Mr. Gaffney has suffered on a previous occasion, the possibility was outlined that the case might exceptionally be addressed through the European Fund for Maritime and Fisheries, but that this was a decision for the Irish authorities as they oversee the allocation of such funding. The Commission could not instruct them in this regard. So, quite clearly, in a letter from the European Commission that has given the government the solution to this crazy situation which has hung over the Gaffney family now for well over a decade, they have given the government an out, pointed to a specific funding stream that could be availed of to pay compensation to this family. But unfortunately, what we've seen is a minister who seems to be very good at playing past the parcel, because he doesn't want to take any responsibility in this. And of course, I'm talking about Minister McConaughey. It's being passed between his department and Minister Eamon Ryan's department. Transport, and neither departments are willing to take responsibility and do the right thing and use the fund that has been identified to pay out the compensation. And I listened intently to Minister Conalogue when he was on the Claire Byrne show on the 17th of this month, speaking about another very serious and very important issue, and that is the issue of MICA. And rightfully so, he said he has 100% support for the unfortunate homeowners whose homes have been blighted by MICA. And he goes on to say that the situation is not their fault. They are living with this daily stress, and nightly they are continuing to pay a mortgage. And there's grave similarities between those families and the experiences of the Gaffney family. He has a situation not through his making, not through his fault. And the government is rightfully looking at the MICA situation in terms of compensation to the families and helping them rebuild their homes. And that's the right thing to do. And it needs to be sped up, the process, that there needs to be 100% redress. But the situation is very clear in terms of Mr. Gaffney, CJ Gaffney, Minister. He has a situation not of his making, not of his fault, that has caused huge levels of stress, anxiety for himself and the family. And now, through government intransigence, we have a situation where nobody in the Irish government is prepared to take this on and deal with it. And deal with it once and for all. There is the solution, Minister. So I'll actually give you a copy of this to pass on to Minister McConaughey. He has seen it. He's seen it dozens of times, because CJ Gaffney and his family have sent this on. MEP Sean Kelly has sent this on. There's been correspondence backwards and forwards. So your own minister is refusing to take this on. So when I opened my remarks, I spoke about the scepticism, in relation to how this government and the predecessors treat the fishing community. Is there any reason why they don't have any faith in this government when you have fishermen like CJ Gaffney, when a solution is handed to the Irish government and yet they're not willing to actually do it? It's not going to cost the Irish government a penny to compensate this family. So, Minister, I'll give you this letter. If you please pass it on to the Minister. Unfortunately, and I hear what you say in terms of him being caught up, I would have preferred if he was here in person to have the conversation with, but I'll give you this. I ask you to take it forward, and I actually call on the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, given his previous comments to the family that when in power he would take this on and deal with it. I think it's incumbent now on the Taoiseach to actually sit down with the two ministers who are refusing and failing this family in actually addressing it once and for all. And I call on Micheál Martin to intervene here to ensure that the right thing is done, that this particular fund is drawn down and the compensation is paid to the Gaffney family. Thanks, Count Corley.
Thank you, Deputy Brady. Now, Deputy Sean Sherlock, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you very much, Cian Corla. The Library and Research Service digest has been very useful, I think, for many of us, because it has encapsulated many of the concerns that have been brought to our attention. And as you know, they've issued a paper in response to the bill. And certainly many issues have been raised in respect of the bill at pre-legislative scrutiny stage, which have to be sufficiently addressed by government. In Table 2 of that report, and I'm quoting directly from the Library and Research Service Bill Digest on this specific bill, where they have indicated what I'd call a traffic light dashboard comparing the bill as published to the committee PLS recommendations. And obviously there's a traffic light system there. I just want to highlight 4 key issues inherent within the bill. The first issue, and I'm quoting directly from the report, issue number 1, as per the committee report this is now, they question the fairness of allocating the point system. The standard of proof required threshold is based upon balance of probabilities rather than culpability beyond a reasonable doubt. In their PLS, pre-legislative scrutiny, the Joint Committee identified the potentially problematic nature of a determination panel concluding on the balance of probabilities as evidenced by the report of the authority rather than on a threshold for proof required. All alleged serious infringements are made by means of a written report by the authority. Section 6 of the bill provides that a determination panel will be established for the purpose of determining whether a serious infringement has occurred and whether a person was, at the time, the master of the sea fishing boat. In addressing an appeals process, an appeals officer will be assigned at the authority. A time period of 30 days is available in which to submit to the appeals officer, and the appeal must be in writing by the master and is subject to a fee to be determined. The issue raised by the committee was that the bill does not address concerns regarding the balance of probabilities, providing the required threshold of proof, nor how existing reports and/or points may or may not be considered in the authority's assessment of further alleged infringements. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2 was the weighing of fishery products in factory. The PLS committee report says that the bill as published, and I'm quoting from the Bill's Digest here, quote unquote, the bill as published does not cover or address this issue. On issue number 3, in terms of applying penalty points to EU and non-EU vessels, there was particular concern that UK vessels in Irish waters are advantaged. The bill does not provide for assigning penalty points to or having a register of points assigned to foreign nationals. Instead, a provision in section 6, I think it's 151 or 15, includes that points assigned to a foreign master will be notified in writing to the relevant authorities of the relevant member state. The UK is not specified. Thus, the bill does not provide for the authority dealing with serious infringements by UK fishing masters in Irish territorial waters in the same way as provided for other EU member states. And the 4th key issue, Ceann Comhairle, is the fair administration and SFPA capacity and resourcing regarding the register of penalty points. Again, at PLS stage, the committee states that the bill does not have provisions for organisational capacity or resourcing for the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. So they're just 4 issues. I quote directly from the Bill's Digest because I think that language has best encapsulated some of the key issues that are exercising communities throughout the country. And I would hope that in response to this stage of the bill, that there might be a further articulation by the Minister, whoever's in possession, in respect of dealing with those very pertinent and key issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. 7 minutes, okay. Sometimes you know, I question our priorities when it comes to the fishing sector, the fishing industry, or fishers. It's probably been the toughest 12 months that the sector have had, with the introduction of a controversial penalty point system this time last year, which didn't go down well with the fishing sector. That would be an understatement. We had Brexit, where the sector and the Irish fleet lost 15% of its quota share. It was a huge blow for the sector, financially, for the fishers themselves, and for coastal communities. And that impact is still to be felt into the future. And then earlier this year, we had the removal of the control plan, which has led to a ludicrous situation where you have boats having to weigh their fish on pier. Has had a huge detrimental impact on the industry. You have situations where boats are coming in, the catch, which is frozen in boxes, is having to be de-iced, taken out of the boxes, weighed on the pier, put back in the boxes, re-iced, and that process is sometimes taking hours, which has a quality impact as well. So these are all things that have happened over the last 12 months that have led to a situation where we've had fishers in their hundreds, if not thousands, boats sailing into Cork Harbour, sailing into Dublin to show their disappointment with the situation for the fishing sector. And then, I guess, the first thing we do when we come back into the Dáil is introduce legislation around further penalty points, when what we should be doing is prioritising the key issues. Like, where is the submission to reintroduce a control plan that will allow the fishing sector to do what they have been doing in a transparent, traceable, and visible way of weighing their fish in factory. That's the priority that we should have. Our other priority is addressing this massive inequality in quota share. The fact that international boats have 85% of the quota share in Irish waters. That's where our priority should be in terms of when we're talking about fishing and sea fisheries, not further penalty points. Our priority should be around fair distribution of the BAR fund to minimise the impact of this 15% quota loss and the impact that the Brexit trade agreement is having on the fishing sector. That's where our priority should be, to ensure that there's a fair distribution right across the board. And in doing that, and there's a lot of talk and a lot of recommendations coming out of talks in the task force, that the lion's share of that BAR fund that is allocated to fishing will go to the big RSW fleets in Donegal. If that is what emerges, that's completely unacceptable, because there's far more than those RSW fleets that have been impacted by Brexit. There are boats right throughout West Cork, in the whitefish sector, the demersal sector, those who have mackerel quotas as well, who have been hugely impacted by the loss in mackerel, and the inshore sector in particular. They have all been impacted by not only Brexit, but an incredible tough 2 years in terms of COVID, in terms of market drops. That's where our priority should be. The control plan, a fair share of fish, not just in Irish waters, but in European waters. And in ensuring that the Brexit fund and the BAR fund is distributed in a fair way that reaches into the fishing sector, the crew on those boats, and right into coastal communities, not bringing in more penalty points. And on the inshore sector, I understand Minister McConalogue met with members of NIFA recently in Tralee. That is a sector that has been ignored for years and has been overlooked for years. And they have some very simple requests. That in terms of the Brexit Adjustment Reserve, that they get their fair share because they have been impacted, but also some simple terms in looking for a de minimis payment, a once-off payment from the Exchequer to help them through this incredibly difficult period that they're having to negotiate at the moment. That's vitally important. I also want to bring up a scheme that I understand that we're being told that funding has been stopped for. This is the very innovative, very helpful Go Fishing scheme. This is where children in communities, in schools, in service providers such as Coaction, through inland fisheries, have the opportunity to introduce people to fishing, whether it's on the shore, whether it's in lakes and rivers. And it has been an incredibly successful project that I understand funding has been pulled for. I would urge the department to reinstate that funding as soon as possible. And finally, on this legislation, I've no doubt that the legislation will pass. I'll be voting with government, as I always do, but I would ask the Minister to consider, we've seen how controversial the statutory instrument was. Consider those two items, this balance of probability issue, and also the issue of if you are convicted and if you are given penalty points and you get them overturned in a court of law, that those penalty points stay with the skipper, stay with the master. It's not right, and it needs to be looked at and amended within this bill. And I would urge the Minister to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy O'Sullivan. Next is Deputy Rory O'Murchu, Neil Shan Shaw. Deputy Holly Kearns, please, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Before discussing the specifics of the bill, I think it's important to note the background to the fisheries penalty point system. Just over a year ago, the Taoiseach, then acting Minister for the Marine, signed a new system into law without consulting the sector. It was the fourth attempt to bring in such a system after High Court rulings in favour of the fishing sector and the Dáil voting down its introduction in 2018. The entire issue was mired in controversy before it even began. The lack of engagement with those affected is not only disrespectful, but straight away creates hostility to a system that is supposed to be about ensuring better practice. The disregard for fishers and coastal communities further deteriorates the relationship between the department and the sector. Last year, many of us in opposition pointed out the inherent flaws in the government's penalty point system. It lacks due process. Points can be issued on a balance of probability, which is a worrying threshold that has no place in any state regulatory process. And then the right of appeal to the High Court is very limited, and in the case of a successful appeal, the penalty points would still remain on a licence. The system seems intentionally hostile by design. Our coastal and island communities deserve better. The fishing sector should be central to creating a viable and fair process. The only way successful and progressive policies can be developed is in genuine partnership with the communities and the businesses affected. Minister, this is all incredibly frustrating because a larger part of the opposition to this new system is entirely of the government's making. A means of regulating the sector and reprimanding bad practices could have been welcomed as a means for rewarding the good work of most of the sector, but instead we have this mess. In relation to the bill, there are a number of points I would like to raise. Firstly, the Minister emphasised yesterday that Ireland is required to implement a point system urgently as we are subject to EU infringement proceedings and the related financial penalties. This type of rationale is deployed by the government too regularly to justify bad policy. We are presented with a flawed system and told we have to pass it as soon as possible. This type of approach just cannot be used to vindicate unacceptable legislation. We were due to have a system in place by the 1st of January 2012. It is successive governments and the Department of the Marine that have failed to do this, not fishing communities in this House. There was no mention of these failures over many years by the Minister yesterday, which leaves me with little confidence that any lessons have been learned. Secondly, a key problem with this system, reflected in numerous submissions from the sector and in the Oireachtas Committee's report, is that the threshold of proof required is based on a balance of probabilities rather than the usual standard of culpability beyond reasonable doubt. This just goes against normative principles of justice and creates a structure with too much scope for arbitrary and inconsistent rulings. Not only is this morally questionable, but it just undermines the entire system. This key issue will have to be addressed. Next is a master or skipper can only appeal the High Court on a matter of law, not on the substance of the case, which is an extraordinary limitation on an individual's access to justice. Related to this is a situation whereby if a master is found innocent of the alleged breaches in court, the penalty points applied under the legislation would not be deleted. How can the government justify that position? It's just unbelievable. What is the rationale for that nonsensical measure? Fourthly, the sector has expressed concern over the potential for inconsistencies between the application of penalty points to EU and non-EU vessels. As it stands, points assigned to a master who is not an Irish citizen will be notified to the authorities of the relevant member state. However, ambiguity exists concerning infringements by fishing masters of non-EU states, including the UK. This lack of clarity means that different masters, according to their nationality, could have different regulatory burdens. Again, this type of variability undercuts any faith in the system. Next, the absence of any reference to weighing fishery products in the bill is worrying. This is a major issue raised by the sector's representatives, which are seeking the reinstatement of in-factory weighing. There are difficulties around the practicalities of the current system and its effectiveness. The Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine highlight this in its report, but the bill does not address it. This omission can be seen as an indication of a government and department out of touch with the realities on the ground. Finally, under EU regulation, the Minister has considerable scope in implementing a penalty points process. I'm seeking that the Minister would use this to produce a system that is based on natural justice and due process, and takes on board the many suggestions made by the sector. I think we're all in agreement that there needs to be a system in place to ensure compliance with fisheries regulations. We should promote best practices through a fair and transparent enforcement approach, and at the moment the bill is far from that. I think also, Minister, when we're on the subject of inadequate consultation processes from the department, it is important to note that that is the reason that the new law in relation to pair trawling within the 6-mile nautical zone was overturned, simply because there wasn't adequate consultation from the department. And I would urge you to reinstate that law with the adequate consultation as soon as possible. Government representatives have said in here today as well that the inshore sector have been neglected, and I have to say I couldn't agree more. We heard an awful lot about the unfair deal that Ireland got in terms of the quota, and I completely agree with all of that, but something that didn't get enough attention is the fact that the Minister is in charge of distributing the national quota, and 2% of that went to the inshore fisheries sector. As the vast majority of people working in the sector, it is the vast majority of vessels in the sector, and it is the kind of sustainable fishing that we should all be getting behind. Instead, 98% of our national quota has gone to roughly around 50 boats, providing far less employment, practising way less sustainable types of practices, and that really needs to be addressed, Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Kearns. Deputy Brian Ledden. Deputy Ledden, you have 7 minutes.
Good Ceann Corla. Minister, I'd like to welcome some aspects of this bill, but it is worth viewing this legislation in the context of Irish fisheries policy and our approach to protecting our marine ecosystems. As legislators, we should always be cautious when introducing regulations which cause a bureaucratic burden on citizens. But when you are considering the protection of the environment and ecosystems, we often frame the debate about environmental regulation as a false war between a busybody state which seeks to unfairly restrict the activities of the likes of farmers and fishermen, and those who live off the land and the sea, who wish to carry on their activities to support their families without encumbrance. We need to wholeheartedly reject this argument. The protection of the environment and ecosystems is in all our interests. But when we set up this false war, one of the frequent outcomes, especially in the fisheries sector, is delay. And this bill is a result of this delay in introducing a point system in fisheries, a very large delay, a delay so large it resulted in the European Commission withholding funding refunds from the European Maritime Fisheries Fund. It is not the only area where we are in trouble for a delay in implementing measures to protect fish stocks. The European Commission has found that how we weigh catches of fish is inconsistent. We have serious faults in how we are implementing the discard ban, and this is likely to be subject to a further infringement procedure. Judicial review proceedings have been initiated to challenge the fact that the EU as a whole failed under the Common Fisheries Policy to meet a legally defined deadline of ending overfishing in all stocks by 2020. Irish ministers have been found to lobby at EU level for increased overfishing and quotas beyond scientifically advised levels. We know there are problems associated with pair trawling, a practice which the Green Party wishes to see prohibited, and the marine environment continues to deteriorate due to continued release of plastic waste, including nets and fishing gear. I understand and sympathise with the plight of the fishing industry, especially post-Brexit. I understand the desire to maintain income levels and reduce red tape. But we simply have to change the way we approach this issue if we are to have any chance of future generations making a living from the sea. It is in all our interest to protect and restore our fish stocks and marine ecosystems. There is no future in a dead sea. I welcome this bill, and I hope this will be the first of many pieces of legislation and initiatives in the fisheries area that will continue to protect our marine ecosystems and encourage a sustainable fishing industry. Very
much, Deputy Ledden. Now our next contributor is Deputy Michael Collins. I must say there are a number of deputies listed here, but I don't know what's happening in the Whip's office. Anyway, it's not my responsibility. Over to you, Deputy Collins.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. I suppose the reason that many of the deputies are missing is because it's fishing. And it's the fishermen of Ireland that are going to be affected by this decision this government are going to make today. And I did hear what you had to say, Deputy Ledden, and I'm disappointed to think that you don't fully realise the suffering that the fishermen are making in this country, because we're giving it away. The stocks are falling throughout the world because we're handing away our quota continuously. But you're quite happy to stand idly by and accept that here today by praising this. This is an astonishingly bad deal going to be for Irish fishermen. The bill aims to criminalise the entire fishery sector and creates an unequal and deeply unfair legal system for fishermen and women. And on that basis alone, I am completely opposed to this bill, Minister. There has been an extensive consultation with the Department's Legal Services Division, the Office of the Attorney General and External Counsel on this issue to devise a system which is compatible with our legal system and existing legislation. However, there has been a completely inappropriate level of any meaningful consultation with Irish fishers. In scrutinising the general scheme of the Sea-Fisheries Amendment Bill 2021, the Joint Committee held public meetings and Department officials engaged with representatives of the Sea Fisheries Protection, the SFP, and met with and received written submissions from fish producer organisations. The Joint Committee concluded its PLS and submitted the PLS findings and concerns report by means of its letter on the 21st of June 2021, in which the Joint Committee Chair expressed that the Joint Committee expresses its concerns at the standard of proof to be used by the determination panel and the appeals officer. The balance of probability is to be used as a threshold for applying penalty points. The balance of probability is astonishing. And rather than culpability beyond a reasonable doubt. Furthermore, the Joint Committee is concerned that penalty points applied under this legislation would not be deleted, even if a master is found innocent of the alleged breaches in a court of law. These issues may negatively impact on perceived fairness of the penalty point system. The Joint Committee called on you to re-examine the standards of proof to be used in the application of penalty points and consider a means by which penalty points may be deleted if a master is found innocent of the alleged offences for which they were applied. Again, an astonishing situation. Good God, it's been mentioned here already yesterday. If it was penalty points and you were driving your car and you actually were inside here in the Dáil today and it was found out you were, and that a mistake was made by the authorities out there, you would get back your penalty points again, and the penalty points that were applied to your licence would be immediately withdrawn and an apology given to you and moved on. But in this situation, if you're caught, you're done, and if you're innocent, you're done. You can't win. It's a no-win situation. A significant issue highlighted in meetings with fish producers' organisation, the SFPA, is the revocation of weighing after transport. There is an urgent need for the SFPA to submit a revised control plan, one which reinstates in-factory weighing across the country, which is a level of oversight by the SFPA and the NSAI that is considered to be unmatched in the EU. Any inconsistency that may arise between the application of penalty points to EU and non-EU vessels must be addressed. Such an inconsistency could lead to Irish vessels facing a major regulatory burden than the UK registered vessels fishing in Irish waters. The new system introducing penalty points for masters of fishing vessels is unfair and unbalanced with nonsensical elements, according to the Irish Fish Producers Organisation. The Oireachtas Committee was told last May that the EU ruling, meaning catches must be weighed at landing rather than at factories, is an absolute disaster, Minister, and totally unworkable. The European Commission said operators did not have the weighing system fit for purpose, that a 2018 audit had identified manipulation of weighing system and that the state had not taken appropriate action to address this. The move brought an immediate end to the derogation from the obligation to weighing catches at landing. The Irish Fish Producers Organisation, IFPO, told the committee that it does not oppose the introduction of a point system to punish serious fishing infringers, but will argue the bill repeats the mistakes of earlier legislation introduced by the last government. The IFPO said the only grounds for appeal to the High Court are on the point of law, which they say is introduced to restrict the rights of appeal of fishermen who fall foul of the Sea-Fisheries Protection Authority. The IFPO told the Committee on Agriculture and Marine that the fact that penalty points will be retained by the master even if they are acquitted in nonsensical whilehoods. However, the anger in the industry is reflected across several other submissions for the fishery sector lobby group. The submissions from the Irish South West Fish Producers Organisation argues the penalty point system could remove an individual's income without them having the recourse to the courts. You could potentially have the farcical situation whereby the High Court rules you are innocent but the penalty points remain on the licence. And that's the whole situation here, Minister, from start to finish. And that's the argument I put here. For the past number of years fishing, as you can see, how many speakers failed to turn up here today to speak on behalf of the fishermen of this country. And it's deflating to be a fisherman, to looking at this and to see what's going on here. This discussion is flying through the Dáil because many of the deputies have failed to show their face and fight for their fishermen. The penalty point system is making criminals of skippers and as I mentioned to you, no matter, even if they're innocent, they're still deemed to be guilty. The whole issue, the weighing crisis at the piers, is an absolute disaster made by the SFPA. Massive losses to the pelagic fleet last Christmas in the Brexit deal. The stinking, rotten Brexit deal that was done signed up to by this government was an absolute disgrace. And to hear a Green Party are wagging the tail in this government. And Minister, you need to be stronger. You need to stand up for these people. You need to understand their livelihoods. You were down in Castledownbere on the Fianna Fáil Roadshow there recently. You didn't tell every other deputy or Oireachtas member that you were coming. It was a nice hidden secret to go around and pat the backs of the people you ruined. You've ruined their livelihoods. They're contacting me. They want out. That's not a way for a fisherman to want to survive in his own livelihood that he ever wanted all his life. And you, to be honest with you, add insult to injury. You said it was a brilliant meeting in a press release, but unfortunately you sent it out a day before you came down. So that'll tell you the disrespect you had. Not alone to the Oireachtas members of West Cork did you fail to notify, but you also disrespected the fishermen by putting out a statement the wrong day, saying that you had a very successful discussion with them when you hadn't discussed it at all, you hadn't even arrived. And that's the situation fishermen find themselves in. They have no respect from start to finish. And it's been going on here. It's not you, it's your predecessors. Your predecessors, one after another, have failed to protect them. And your deputies will come in here and back this because the Green Party says he must do it, because he say he must do it. It's time that someone within Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, stand up for the people who elected you. That's what you must do. And this is a raw deal, down one raw deal down on top of the other raw deal, and there is ways out. Because while the British had to bring in a penalty point system, they certainly had to, in their time, had to do negotiations. And they'd done a proper negotiations with their fishermen while they were in Europe in relation to the penalty point system. We did no negotiation. We're asking Europe, how high do you want us to jump so we'll comply with the rules? How much more quota will we ask them do we need to lose again next year? so that we comply with the rules. I called for a senior minister in negotiations of government for the marine, and he failed miserably to give that senior minister, and it has cost us dearly this great industry we have at our doorstep. We have a task force that's in place at the moment. And to be honest with you, I was at down the Irish Southwest Fish Producers Organisation's AGM on Saturday, and they told me that they put so many amendments forward to try and put a better system in place. And as far as they're concerned, this task force wasn't allowed to take on board their amendments. So what's going on out there? What good is a task force if nobody can have any input into it to try and see could they fight for the survival of their fellow fishermen? And that rolls down along to the respect of the inshore fishermen. They certainly are feeling the pinch as well, as many feel here that they've been neglected. We have a weighing crisis that appears as an absolute disaster. We have an SFPA that seems to protect everybody else but the Irish fishermen. We have a system out here that we know of penalty points so we can drag in our innocent fishermen that are working hard out there that might not be guilty of an infringement, but when there was a ramming incident of a Castletown bear trawler a few months ago, by a Spanish trawler illegally fishing in Irish waters, nobody could go to help them. They were left there. Do you know, it tells you what side of the world we're living in, and it tells what side is government. And when I hear Deputy Ledden coming in here with the Green Party delighted about this, he hasn't read it. He doesn't understand how hard it has been on the Irish fishermen. He talks about quotas. Don't look at Ireland running and throwing away their quotas. This being given to the foreign fleet are robbing our fish out of our waters, and we're allowing it continuously. And I ask for each and every TD from Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party to stand up here today and oppose this. Oppose it from start to finish.
Thank you very much, Conchola. I'm glad to get the opportunity to talk about this very important matter that's affecting fishermen from West Cork, Kerry, Dingle and Castlereagh, all the ways up to the west of Ireland to Donegal. Myself and Deputy Collins and Deputy Ferris met with Minister Creed when he was doing the statutory instrument before, and he didn't listen to us. Gladly, Pat the Cope Gallagher, your former fellow deputy from Donegal, and know the statutory instrument. And what does the Taoiseach do when he gets into power? Micheál Martin introduces the statutory instrument again. These penalty points, the way they're being meted out, is not fair, because if you contested in the court, and even if you won the case, you won't get your points, the points off your licence again. This legislation makes no sense, as UK vessels are not going to get points in Irish waters. There's no fairness in the court system. Killybegs Fishermen Organisation argues that penalty point system could remove an individual's income without having recourse to the courts. This is a farcical situation where the court says you're innocent, but the points still remain. Even Minister, that you're from Donegal, I'm asking you, are you going to stand, even that you are a minister from Donegal, are you going to stand over this, what's happening here, and hurting fishermen from Killybegs all along the west, down to Dingle and Castlereagh and all the west coast of Cork? After all, you are a minister from a county very much like ours. The weighing of the fishery products is not covered by this bill, even though that the government knows that this is a serious issue since new rules were introduced in the 13th of the 4th, 21, with immediate effect. In short, the difficulties arise around where the weighing can take place before or after transport, i.e. at piers rather than in factories, removing ice packaging and have to put it all back in place again. This is totally unfair. Individual weighing and repacking as part of the weighing control system, and the problem that this process would result in, will not result for better fish quality. Applying penalty points to Irish fishermen, where UK fishermen fishing in Irish waters are not to be taxed at all in Irish territorial waters. I mean, Minister, what are you and the government at? Can you not stand up for fair play? And I say to you, rather than penalising fishermen in our own fishermen, why don't he fight for more quota for them and give them a chance to live? You're affecting the rural communities as well as the fishermen.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you. Thank you, Cahill. Minister, it says enough about what's being proposed here to say that the Green Party are saying that they are quite happy with it. That should be enough about it, and that should make you totally apparent to what is before us. How you or anybody else in the governing parties can support this is beyond belief. We're all there to do our best and to represent the different sectors that we're there for. And I can't for the life of me how anybody can agree with what is actually before us here today, because it's hurting our fishermen. That is a fact. Now, if you can stand up here today on the record of the Dáil, and if you can make a case for why this is good for fishermen, good for our fishermen, good for the people that I represent, whether they're around the coast of Kerry, whether they're up the west of Ireland, whether they're above where you're from. And I'm absolutely shocked to think that you could actually support this, of all the people in the world, because I will listen very greatly to any argument by you or by anyone else in the Greens, for example, that will try and say that this is good for our fishermen. Our fishermen have been downtrodden over many, many years, and I can't understand why. They're part of our heritage, they're part of our culture, they're part of what we want to keep going, and all they want to do is to survive, whether it's on a full-time or a part-time basis that they're fishing. I know that even last weekend I met with groups of fishermen who were telling me the way they're hurting so bad. People who were operating in a small way, even just individuals on their own, going out fishing, and they're just saying it's getting more and more difficult all the time. And I can't understand why you or anybody else would want to go imposing what is actually crazy, and we can give the whole day debating about the actual intricacies of what is actually being proposed. But like, whereby you could have a situation that penalty points would be applied and still stand, even though they would be deemed to be found to be applied in the wrong in the first instance. Why do we have to treat these people like they're criminals? It just does not make sense. And like, we can have fishermen coming in from other countries then, and what they'll do is fine. It just, again, no, my time isn't up. Just, yeah. So, yeah. So what I want to get across is, I'm standing here today, pleading with you at this late hour. For God's sake, do something to help these people to be able to make their livelihoods. Could I just say one thing? And I was very glad that you came to my county recently. And on a personal basis, you're a very nice gentleman. But how in the name of God do you think it's a good idea, or anyone in your department thinks it's a good idea? I was the first deputy because I was of an agricultural house, and I was delighted to see you come in as a minister, and I was one of the first people to say that I wanted our new minister to come to County Kerry. But since when did the government bring in this, what I would call extremely discourteous thing of it's like it's a big secret, the itinerary of a minister when he's coming into a county where other people are there to represent. You did the exact same thing, and I didn't realise that until I heard Deputy Collins talk about it. But on a personal basis, you might think it means nothing, but on a personal basis, it is hurtful. There's been Healy Rays in Kerry for a long time, and when a minister was ever coming to Kerry, the minister would always say, look, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going. The people that you met, I know every one of them. I was talking to every one of them. Again, I want to apologise. I didn't get to meet you myself because I had scheduled clinics. But then again, how could I know what you were doing when you or your office didn't tell me exactly what you were doing? And it's only a matter of courtesy. But is it that he don't want to meet other public representatives if he are doing a roadshow? But on a personal basis, just so that you realise, it is a hurtful thing to do. And I thought that we were, you know, in politics, that Yeah, I thought that we were doing bigger and better than that, and I just want to get that across to you. And sorry, I don't want to eat into Deputy McGrath's time.
I do rise to my feet and say I wish to lament, a silent lament, that Deputy Patrick O'Gallagher isn't here. He stopped this by way of statutory instrument. Minister Taoiseach Martin, when he was in acting for agriculture, when he disposed of one of his ministers, he did to him unceremoniously, signed it again to reverse it. So he's do anything to grovel to the Greens. The Greens are welcoming this. How can you have a situation where the courts of the land can clear people of charge and clear them of anything, and the penalty points will still remain? Have you learned nothing from the closure and the loss of our sugar industry? I'm not a fishing person at all, but I do support my colleagues, and I want to compliment the Hilly Rays and Michael Collins, who's been tirelessly representing the fishermen here. And thinking that you didn't notify me you were going down to West Cork. Now, you don't care as well. You called to the mark, my hometown, and you didn't even notify your own colleague, Deputy Cahill. You brought a Fine Gael senator with you. So I don't know if you knew the fish from the cattle or what you were doing, because the press release about Castledown Bear went out even before you arrived. How patronising and how insulting and how awful to families that are being forced out of business and being expected to take compensation. It's an awful way to treat people. Just give them money, get rid of this industry. We got rid of the beet, I said. We're getting rid of our peat. So there's no room for ordinary people. The plain people of Ireland can't work, can't heat their houses, can't fish for themselves and for their livelihoods. So it's the hell of the Connacht. Like Cromwell had when he came into Tipperary all those years ago. It's the hell with rural Ireland now with Fianna Fáil. I can't believe it. And when Minister Coughlin was Minister, she informed every public representative when she came, you know what I mean, let them come if they can come in. So this cloak and dagger stuff around, I know you're hiding from the people of Donegal and you're spending a lot of time all over the country because you can't face your own people, but you're going to have to face them. In the long rest are waiting for you. You'll have to face them in the next election. And hopefully the minister, the former deputy and minister, Lascon Cole and MEP, Patrick O'Gallagher will return. He will represent the people of Donegal, the fishermen. He will represent the people of Donegal across the board, and he won't be abandoning them like you are and selling your soul for 60 shillings.
Thank you, Deputy. We now move back to government slot, Deputy Crowe. 7 minutes.
Thank you, Lascon Corla. I came in at the tail end of the previous contribution by Deputy Matthew McGrath, overly personalised. I don't think it's necessary. I think this debate and the work of our chamber should be above that. So we're here to deal with important legislation today that has many positive elements to it. And I think the personal charges that are thrown across here sometimes, they happen too often in here. It's certainly not. When I looked as a young fella at Dáil over the years and said, this is the career I want to have, it's certainly not that model of politics.
Please. Deputy McGrath. Deputy McGrath, sorry, Deputy Crowe. Deputy McGrath, take your seat this instant. I gave you a fair bit of latitude. Yes, you did. You went way off at what is acceptable during a second stage speech. Yes, you did, and you know it. I allowed you some latitude. Have some courtesy to another member of the House who has the floor. Deputy Crowe, please.
Yeah, no, I'll just conclude that introductory remark by saying I have the utmost respect for my colleague Deputy McGrath. We share a corridor, we're neighbours in one corridor, but I do take exception to seeing kind of personalised stuff being thrown in here to chamber. I think it's above, I think it's below, I should say, where we need to be at in terms of the quality of debate here on a particularly important matter. So look, this is an important bill, and it provides for a number of amendments to the Sea-Fisheries and Maritime Jurisdiction Act, which dates back to 2006, and it legislates for a point system for Irish masters of sea fishing boats. I understand that, Lascon Corla Minister, we're the only country that doesn't have that system yet. And I think it's been misrepresented over the past few days that this is some kind of a punitive system, equated perhaps at times to what happens when one is driving and commits an offence when they're driving a car. This is quite a different system, and I think it needs to be seen for what it is. What I really want to say is, for all the good that this bill does, and I think we should all be supporting this bill, I think it's important to have a more broadened debate about the fishing industry. It is an industry in Clare. It is an employer, certainly along parts of our county, such as Doonbeg and up along the coast. It's much bigger, of course, in the Minister's constituency, and even bigger again when you get down along the coast, towards Castledown Bear and some of those harbours in Cork. But what I've been hearing time and time again, and I saw it firsthand only a few months ago when they docked up outside the convention centre in protest, I boarded some of those trawlers that afternoon. I had an hour or so of free time, and I went on board some of those trawlers. I met trawlermen from my own county of Clare, from Cork, Kerry, Donegal, Mayo, up along the western seaboard. And one after one, they told me just how difficult it is for them to survive. They asked me to follow, I can't remember the app, Las Concordia, but it's a little bit like Flight Radar. There's an app on your phone in which you can cast an eye over the Irish Sea or the Atlantic, and you can see what vessels are at sea at a particular time. So they asked me just to monitor it over a week or two, and I did. And what I could see off our coast were fleets of Spanish vessels time and time again. I'm not an expert on jurisdiction waters and whatnot, but at one point I was also told by some people working in Shannon Airport that there was an offshore Spanish hospital ship at one point out in the Atlantic. Given that there were so many trawlers from the Spanish fleet out there, they had a hospital ship out at sea at one point to service that large crew of people on board trawlers. And I think really what we need to be looking at is the regulatory regime we fall under. So there's, we're in a large European bloc, and it seems illogical to me at times that our own fishing industry is struggling when the Spanish and other Mediterranean fishing industries very much seem to be booming. So I support this legislation, but I think there's a need for a wider dialogue in terms of supporting our fisheries. I know it's close to Minister McConalogue's heart, despite what some have tried to insinuate here today. He has at all times not hidden from the fishing industry or any other industry that his ministry represents. He's engaging with them, and I think there needs to be more and deeper engagement in terms of supporting them. Thank you, Las Concordia.
Thank you, Deputy Crowe. We now move back to Sinn Féin. Deputy Maritime, you have 7 minutes. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill today. Wexford has a strong maritime tradition, a strong fishing community, and a strong sense of justice, stemming from our proud history of resistance to colonialism and the unoppressive laws. So it is no surprise that this bill is not welcome in County Wexford or throughout all coastal communities on this island. Despite the government being informed by all major stakeholders in the fishing industry that this law is a bad law. The fishing industry now faces major issues from Brexit and the loss of 15% of our quotas. This industry is just about surviving. This bill has many faults. It is imperative to apply the law of the land as in a manner equal to the law of the sea. However, this is not the case. The law of the land states you are innocent until you are proven guilty. However, this bill is contrary to that sacred principle, because this bill holds the legal threshold of the balance of probabilities over the principle of reasonable doubt. Another major flaw in this bill is the penalty point to remain on the licence, even when the accused has successfully appealed to the courts. We are calling for this legislation to be redrafted. We need a complete renegotiation of the Common Fisheries Policy that would rebuild the valuable Irish fishing industry that contributes millions of euros to the Irish economy every year and employs thousands of people.
Thank you, Deputy Moynton. I now move to Independent Group. 20 minutes slot. Deputy Pringle, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'm sharing time with Deputy Connolly as well, so
thank you.
But I'm not sure what time will be left or whatever, but Deputy Connolly will use whatever's left over. I would just like to start off just by saying, referencing to some of the other speakers earlier on there, about I'm not aware of any notification having come forward, Minister, just in relation to your visits to the ports as well. It could be wrong, but I'm not sure they are. So maybe there could be something wrong with the communication within your department. But I'm not aware of an invitation having come forward, just to see that. And I actually just checked with my office just to see, and there wasn't. So the other members are right in what they're saying in terms of actually being notified. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed as well. Because it's interesting, it's always interesting, I think, that maybe when the news is going to be bad, the invitations will be widened out, that everybody else will see it, particularly in terms of the MICA, which is not related to this bill, but the MICA sees that we get invited when there's going to be bad news, so it's to deflect it a bit off, and if it's going to be good news or if it's going to be something else, it'll only be the government that'll be invited. Look, in relation to this bill, I think it's interesting, just looking at the junior minister's contribution yesterday and that there, and he talked about the need for this bill to take place, and I actually think that there isn't a need for it, but I think that the bill is very fatally flawed, I believe, because it doesn't provide proper outlets for people who have a problem with it of actually going to the courts and actually having their case met there. And I think this bill probably will end up in the courts after it's passed, because the fact is that you have the numbers that this bill will be passed, so it will be passed anyway, and it probably will end up in the courts then as well to actually look at, see whether the provisions are actually proper and right, and I think that's unfortunately fair enough, because obviously this House, by force of numbers, can't do it anyway. And a bill that provides for, on the balance of probabilities, for something to take place is grand, and if it was only this administrative procedure that was taking place, but we also have a criminal procedure that runs alongside this as well, and I think that's probably unique in the European terms as well. I think that this mixture of legal positions that we have, and maybe that should be dealt with, and I think there's a need to actually put fishing on maybe if it was all administrative functions that might be more acceptable to the industry themselves as well. And there's no doubt that the industry is going through a very difficult period at the minute, and this is symbolic of it. And I would have to again take issue with some of the previous speakers where they said that, Deputy Pat Gallagher stopped this when you were in opposition, and that's right, it did. That motion that went forward was supported by all the members here. But the key part of that was that when he was in opposition, because I'm sure that when Fianna Fáil would go into government, it would be implemented anyway, whether Pat Cope was here or not. And that's the reality of the situation, because it's easy to stop things when you're in opposition, and you go into government, then you do the exact opposite. And we've seen that too often. Right across the board in this Parliament, to know that it's going to be any different. So while I have a lot of respect for Pat Gallagher and the work that he did here in this House, I don't think it would have actually made a difference when he went back into government, because this system would have been implemented regardless. Now, and the junior minister, when he spoke about it, in that he talked about that the serious financial implications arise from the non-implementation of the point system, and it goes on then to say that approximately €24 million to date has been lost because of this, and this will reach €37 million in 2022. Now, I don't think that represents serious financial implications. Now, there's no doubt that 24 million and 37 million is a lot of money. There's no doubt about that, and it's a lot of money to any individual out there in the country. But in terms of the state where we're talking now in billions, in terms of billions that we do for everything, it's not a huge amount of money. And I don't think it's a justification to say that we should be doing that because we're losing out on this money. We should be doing it because it's the right thing to do, or whatever. Now, obviously, the government has agreed that it is the right thing to do, but the government has agreed this all with Europe, and that they're going to implement it anyway, regardless. So I don't agree with the reasons that they outlined there, that it has to be passed, and I think that will be open to challenge as well. The system is unfair. It's difficult. It's going to be difficult for masters of vessels to manage, and it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to be implemented as well, because I think that will be the crux to it as well, and a lot of fishermen will be looking to see how the implementation of this will take place and whether it will be actually done in a fair way, because the experience, whether rightly or wrongly, the experience of many fishermen has been that the government doesn't work with them but works against them in terms of how they go about their business, and that may be wrong, and but that is the experience, and that can't be discounted when dealing with the government, that they feel that way, and that's vitally important. So, I mean, fishing is no doubt is at a difficult stage now at the minute, and it has been at a difficult stage, and with the Brexit and with the implementation of these penalty points and stuff like that there. But fishing has always been at a difficult stage, and fishing has always been put on the back burner and left on the back burner. And for many years, fishermen developed the fishing industry and worked on in spite of government policy rather than because of government policy, or worked with government policy. And if this is going to be dealt with, and if fishing is going to be put on a sustainable footing and into the future, and that the only way that this is going to be dealt with is by a complete and utter review of the Common Fisheries Policy. And we have to go back, and the Irish government, whether it's a Fianna Fáil minister that's there, Fine Gael minister, or Sinn Féin minister, or whoever the minister that is there in the future, is going to have to accept that the wrongs have been done going back to the early 80s. And in fact, actually, before we even joined the EU, the wrongs that started there, when the European Union made the conservation of fish and stocks the sole responsibility of the European Commission while our negotiations were taking place. And at the time, it was the only item that was the sole responsibility of the European Commission. And now, why was that? And it was because Europe was fully aware of what we were bringing to the table, and we weren't. And that's the reality of the situation. And we weren't for a number of different reasons. We weren't because the government wasn't up to speed with it. We weren't because fishermen weren't talking to the government probably, and that as well, and letting the government know. And anecdotally, I've heard as well that the government wouldn't believe fishermen when they said what they actually could catch, and they reduced that then when they went into Europe to negotiate in the common fisheries policy. Whereas what happened in France was that the French government increased what the fishermen told them they could catch, and so they ended up with a bigger total allowable catch from that stage. And from that point on, we've been at a problem. And it's coming to a head now. It's coming to the point where there's no more road. There's no more change that can take place. There's no more ways that the industry can turn a blind eye or the government can turn a blind eye and allow things to happen and stuff like that there. What needs to happen is there has to be a recognition that the fishing industry has been shafted by Europe and by lack of government response and support for it over the years. And it's not any one government's fault or anything like that there, it's not any one individual's fault or anything, but it's just a fault of the whole system, and the whole system has worked against them. And we need, if we're going to put it on a sustainable footing, we need to get that acceptance. And we need an Irish government to go out to Brussels and go out to Europe and fight on behalf of the fishing industry. Not every year where we have the charade of going out before Christmas and coming back with less again and dressing it up as being a success and everything like that there. But we have to go out and change the balance of how things are actually decided so that we don't have to have this every year, and we don't have to have the government going out to expending some of us fighting always for the Hague principles and stuff like that there to make sure that they're in place and maintained as well. So that's what I think is the only option that we have in terms of the fishing industry. And if we don't do that, unfortunately what's going to happen is it's going to continue to decline, and it's going to decline and decline, and Killybegs will decline, Greencastle will decline, Burton Port is wiped out already anyway, and and so right along the coast it's all going to decline, and it's going to get into a situation where the coastal communities won't be able to survive, and that's going to be very detrimental for the whole country, because we've seen this whole Dublin-centric development that has been always been here, and that's just going to increase and get further and further if that's what you're going to allow to happen, and that's sadly what government seems to be prepared to allow to happen, and we need to stop that. And the only way we can stop that is by government saying that it has to stop, and government going out and fighting in Europe to actually make sure that changes, and actually stand up and fighting properly in relation to it, and saying that it's unacceptable, and saying that we want this change, and we're going to demand this change. Then things will come out, and I think then everybody in this house would stand behind the government and actually support what they'll be doing to actually make those changes and make those changes properly, and that's vitally important. So look, I think it's symptomatic of the problems that are there that there's been so much resistance to this legislation. But I think this legislation is flawed, and I think it needs to be rehashed and redealt with again and looked at again. And I think there has to be an option where people, if they're not happy with it, do have the fallback to go to the courts. It's going to cost them a lot of money, and they'll probably have to go and fight this again in the courts when it gets through the House here as well. And that's going to be very detrimental, and I think it's a retrograde step if that is the case. So the government just has had just a poor approach to dealing with these issues. And you see that the Minister and the government has let down Donegal farmers, Donegal fishermen, and then we're going to see in the Micah situation in the weeks to come as well. Hopefully they won't be let down either, but it wouldn't hold out much hope for it. And I think that we have an opportunity now in relation to fishing, and if we can do this over the next couple of years, we can work together to make this happen. And unfortunately, I don't think the political will is there on the government side to actually make that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Pringle, Deputy Connolly.
Tam sasta Portic lacus a G-Sporach seo, tá an tábhar seo Harbheith tábhachtach de hiascarí na tíre agus éintim le mo cólaci go bhfuil neamhord agus dochar déanta don Arnold de réir policy lanúnacha on a realtas éagsúla. I agree with the comments from my colleague in relation to the fishing industry and how Ireland has completely and utterly lost out with the common fisheries policy. But I haven't time to go into that today, except that I agree with them on the record, and I want to look at what's before us. And I've taken the trouble to read it, and I preface by my remarks by saying I'm no expert in this area, but I've done my best to get my head around what's happening here. So we have a bill with 15 sections, and that bill is very very late coming, and we are in trouble with the EU again, and they're withholding money. So the Minister might clarify. I see the word withheld, money being withheld. Does that mean if we're good boys in the class we'll get that money back, or is that money lost? Because the word withheld was used. And so it has come forward because the EU have sent us a reasoned opinion, and they tell us we have no choice but to act, and this is the action that we have taken. Now, the action, when I look at it, is definitely faulty, and I'll come back to why. But the Commission decided today to send a reasoned opinion to Ireland over its failure to fulfil its obligations under the 09 directive, and it goes on to say, specifically, Ireland has failed to comply with European rules on establishing a points system for fisheries-related serious infringements committed by masters and licence holders. There's a point you might come back to. Masters and licence holders of vessels flying the flag of Ireland. And it goes on to say then, which is interesting, that Ireland has also failed to put into operation the current national legislation, which is the 2006 Act, implementing the point system for licence holders. So let me try and simplify that for myself. So we're bringing in a new point system for skippers, parallel to a point system that was brought in 2006 for licence holders. Although it seems through a typo or an error in the legislation, that system was never implemented. Perhaps the Minister might clarify that for me, because I would have thought we would have learned from the existing point system, reviewed it, checked it, see what were the good points, what were the bad points before we rolled out another point system. So is the current licence system and the points for licence holders of boats that was brought in 2006 in operation? Or is my understanding correct? And I thank the Library Service once again for producing the digest under pressure. I think they're great. They tell us section 28, most of the amendments are dealt with as technical amendments. Courtesy of page 7 of the Library Digest, the most significant proposed amendment relates to section 28 of the 2006 Act, which deals with penalties for certain indictable fishery offences. This amendment is intended to address a typographical error in this section, which effectively means that there is currently no way to prosecute anybody detected fishing without a valid sea fishing boat licence. So, Minister, would you come back to that for me? Not that I want to be a voice for prosecutions, but I want to know about that parallel system that's there from 2006. It's now 21. We're now correcting a typo, and we all make errors. I have no difficulty with that. I do have a difficulty with the length of time it's taken to correct a typo error, not to learn from it, not to explain to us today what was the consequences of that typo error, and is there a point system in being or not? That's unforgivable that that's not been explained to us today, and please explain it in your wrap-up. Then we're introducing a point system for skippers, and as well as having a civil side where we're going to give them points if there's a serious infringement, we also have the criminal side. And I'm not sure why we need both of them, and again, if you could clarify it for me, I'd appreciate it. But what seriously troubles me is we're going to doubly punish the skipper. We're going to give the skipper points, then we're going to prosecute the skipper, be it a man or a woman. And however, if that prosecution fails and the person is found innocent, they're still left with the points. Now, none of that makes sense. If somebody could explain that to me, I'd be delighted to try and explain it to the fishermen on the ground, because it's something I'm able to do when I grasp it, but I can't grasp it, so I can't explain it, except to say it's absolutely contradictory, unfair and unacceptable. So that's a major problem for me. And then we're going on through this. It's a short bill, as I said, with 15 sections. However, there's a major role here for the Sea-Fisheries Protection Authority. And I took the trouble of looking at that report as well. April 2020 is that report, and they highlight the most serious issues. So it was the final report, review of the organisation capability of the SFPA, 6 core themes: strategic, management, organisational structure and design, and I'll read it. Internal structures and staffing arrangements, industrial relation, working environment and process, learning and development, internal and external communications. Headquarters in Clonakilty, no connection or no rapport or no communication between Clonakilty and the ports, I'm told. I'm slightly putting my words on it, but there's a clear gap between Clonakilty and the ports. The SFPA is not working effectively and requires urgent attention. This now was April 2020. Relationship and trust have been impacted. Long-standing industrial relations. This was identified as early as 2009 in a report of the analysis of the Employee Opinion Survey of the SFPA carried out by Joe Wolfe and Associates. The organisation needs to be reset and unified with a clear and agreed articulation of its mandate. It needs to focus on its primary functions. It needs a clear focus on an accepted vision and core mission with agreed objectives. It needs a clear and accepted framework of responsibility, accountability, behaviours and authority in order to drive management's effectiveness. There are 3 more pages and I have 3 minutes, and I'm not going to use my 3 minutes in relation to it. An oversight group will be needed to oversee delivery, supported by portfolio management, all these lovely words of the 21st century. SFPA is consistently not meeting targets across fisheries control and seafood safety. SPFA lacks cohesiveness, and there is a fundamental disconnect, so I'll be precise with the words straight from the report, a fundamental disconnect between the port and the offices and the managements and headquarters. So that's the summary, in my words, of that report, which is absolutely a damning indictment of the situation in relation to the authority that's there. I'm laying blame on nobody. I'm simply highlighting the report to say there's something seriously wrong here. And now we have a penalty point system that's going to be administered by that authority, and no action has been taken in relation to resolving the problems in that authority. This bill went to the committee, and they wrote to you on the 21st of June 2021, and lots of TDs have pointed this out already, and they highlighted 4 bullet points. Crystal clear, very focused, very much to the point. None of them have been addressed in the bill. So we'll just highlight them again. Standard of proof on the balance of probabilities. Again, I can understand that to a certain extent, the balance of proof, because beyond reasonable doubt is in court. But it has to be explained to me what other systems, and I would have thought the 2006 one was the best one to look at, but I couldn't look at it because it seems it can never come into operation. So that's one point. Then the weighing and the debacle over the action taken by the EU, and they've absolutely right to do an audit, absolute right to highlight the problems. But when the sins of a few, if I use that concept, when the sins of the few and the consequence of those sins are visited on the many, then it's most unjust. So a decision was made to stop the weighing in the manner that it was allowed before, where it went to the factory, and it has to take place on the quay side, which is extremely difficult throughout Connemara, Rossaville, Carna, and where they land fish. And I think the EU was unjust in making that unilateral decision in that manner. It should have been a lot more nuanced. The other 2 things highlighted by the cross-party committee that was completely ignored was the inconsistency. They want to highlight there should be no inconsistency between penalty points to EU and EU vessels, particularly in the context of Brexit and England. And then finally, the one that I focused on myself, the Joint Committee calls on you to support and resource the implementations of the recommendations of this report by the accountants. Now, having looked at all of that, then I would expect a minister, or I don't know at this point, it's difficult not to lose hope sometimes, but then democracy is difficult and we have a duty to make it work, but to explain to us what were the problems with the 2006 Act? Why wasn't it operational? Was there a point system? Is this parallel with it? Where are we going with it? And not to build in an arbitrariness into this and an unjust system that we cannot stand over.
Thank you, Deputy Connolly. I now call Deputy Verona Murphy. Deputy, 20 minutes.
And good evening, Minister. The main purpose of the legislation is to enshrine European regulations into Irish law. The Irish fishing community must shudder with dread when they hear the phased new EU regulations. There have been so many EU regulations placed on the fishing community, and very rarely do they seem to be introduced with the intention of making it easier to make a living from fishing. The first thing that catches my eye in this bill is the Irish Fishing Master Register. The bill contains details of all of the information which is to be kept on each registered owner. It allows only registration when the person is an Irish citizen and has fewer than 90 penalty points. It is, of course, welcome that we have a registration system which does not allow foreign rogue traders or serial offenders. But what about those who will be required as skippers on work permits? Because like many sectors at this time, there is still a difficulty in sourcing staff of all kinds, and we must not limit their ability to recruit on a work visa basis, where and when there is no one in Ireland either available or wants the job. The bill also requires the Master to furnish the Minister with such information as he or she may reasonably require, and that the format of applications will be also up to the Minister to specify. I would urge the Minister in this regard that if this bill does pass, that such information required will be kept to only the information of which is absolutely necessary. I would not like to see a situation where honourable and genuine people are made to jump through unnecessary bureaucratic hoops in order to become a registered master, and turn away from the prospect as it becomes too onerous in nature, more about the paperwork than their ability. I also hope that the form and manner of the application process will be made user-friendly and will have multiple options, including both online and traditional application methods, as this is a problem in so many other sectors, not least the HGV driver licence sector. In broad terms, I fundamentally support the idea that we need controls over who is allowed to operate with a fishing licence in our waters. However, there are aspects further along in this bill, and many of my colleagues have mentioned them today, that are causing fishers, my fishing constituents, great concern. I draw my colleagues' attention to the section titled Assignment of Points by Authority. Where an infringement occurs, the bill makes a distinction between how an Irish citizen should be treated as compared with the citizen of another EU member state. To quote A, in a case where the master concerned is an Irish citizen, notify the master in writing. Section 1 of it having been so notified, and 2 of the proposal to assign the appropriate points in accordance with Annex 30 of the Commission's regulation to the master by the series of infringements. B, in a case where the master concerned is a national of another member state, notify the master, 1, of it having been so notified, and 2, that it is proposed to notify the competent authority of the member state of which the master is a national of the detection of the series infringement. So, Minister, you can see immediately that a non-level playing field will exist if this bill is passed in its present format. An Irish citizen who commits an infringement in Irish waters will have penalty points applied by the Irish authorities, yet when it is a foreign master who commits an infringement in Irish waters, they will not have penalty points applied by the Irish authorities. All we can do is notify the authority in their country of origin. Now, what mechanism will be used and how proportionate will that policing be on foreign fishing boats compared to Irish boats? Surely we should have the authority to police our own waters as we see fit, rather than only being able to refer offences to other jurisdictions. It isn't just referred to the police force of their country of origin. Offences committed in our waters or lands should be dealt with here, and that should be the case in all matters. This is a very fundamental issue. If this passes, then we do not have a level playing field, as I've already stated. We do not have the right to police our own waters, and we do not have the right to punish offenders in our own waters. A very concerning state of affairs, and one I will not be supporting. The bill then goes on to highlight all of the different levels of suspensions based on the number of penalty points accumulated. Again, I want to reiterate, I have no problem with Irish rule breakers facing sanctions, but we could have a situation where foreign registered vehicles who continually break the rules can continue to fish in our waters because we have no powers to deal with them, and that we do not use them proportionately. If the authority in the country of origin doesn't take action or isn't as zealous as our own SFPA, or as they should be, I suppose, then we will have a two-tiered system of regulation. This cannot be tolerated. We must be able to penalise any vessels fishing in our waters. I ask the following questions of all my colleagues here who claim to represent fishing communities. Would you feel comfortable visiting your local quayside and explaining to the hard-working fishermen that the Irish authorities have no power to penalise foreign vessels for misbehaviour in our waters. These fishers watch every day as the SFPA board Irish vessels, and let alone the foreign registered boats that unload on the quayside beside them. It's totally demoralising for them as Irish fishers to see that the Irish Enforcement Agency is on them and foreign boats just go unnoticed. If you would feel comfortable breaking that news and recognise that it clearly creates a non-level playing field, then you must surely vote against this bill as it currently stands. And for those of you who do not represent fishing communities or who are not familiar and who are not familiar with the fishing industry, I'll use this analogy. Would you feel comfortable visiting a local victim of a burglary and explaining to the distraught homeowners that the Gardaí, even though they knew who the culprits are, that they cannot punish them because they aren't Irish citizens? Homeowners wouldn't accept that. Ordinary, everyday, hard-working people wouldn't accept it either. And fishermen should not be forced to accept this bill. Now, Minister, there's been a lot said today in relation to your visit, and I was invited to your visit in Wexford. That's not to say I have been left out of other ministers' trips to Wexford. I understand the feeling of my deputies entirely, and I don't think that when a ministerial visit is in a county, I think really every deputy should be invited. I appreciate that that may have absolutely nothing to do with you. And I have already spent some time this morning in the House, I suppose you could say, trying to make public service and public servants accountable. And I think you've already had your own personal debacle where a press release was issued that was prior to your visit. And I think you know and well understand the ridiculousness of something like that happening. But I will say this, the fishermen that you met in Kilmore and the women that were there were very appreciative. You did give them over 2 hours of your time. And I know particularly that that visit didn't come to a halt till 10 o'clock that night, in which case I could see that you were left looking for somewhere to eat. I know your job isn't easy. My job is not easy. Everybody is well paid for it. It just doesn't make it easy. But I can tell you this, the fisherman's job is extremely difficult. It's all weathers, it's all dangers, away from their families, on board small vessels sometimes, or cramped vessels where they're mixing with people that they just have to work with and live with for days at a time. They have to reap a reward, because the reward they bring to us, and I said it last week in relation to the Marine Strategy Bill, they feed us. They make our coastal communities what they are. We have renowned fish restaurants in this country, and for a country the size of it, counties like Donegal and Wexford equally share in a tourist industry because we have such good restaurants. We can provide such wholesome, tasty food, and it comes from our natural resources. And I know that because you're from a fishing county, no more than myself, you know that that's the case. You know that there are certain measures being brought upon us by the EU that you yourself don't agree with. I don't agree with it, and I don't think it should be forced upon us. I think we do, at some point, have to renegotiate this, whether that's part of the Common Fisheries Policy that I hope will be imminent, but we certainly have to start to recognise where our natural resources are. And it's not that we have a small amount of fishermen, because they all expand into a much wider community. And the provision of fresh fish from our waters into our restaurants and our hospitality and tourism sector, which are massive. And that's the community I live in. I might be a long way from Gorey, and they may not have a fishing community, but they most certainly bear the fruits of the fish that comes out of our waters in their restaurants also. And the same in Donegal, and the same in every county in this country. And I don't want to see it denigrated by the EU because they think that they're creating a level playing field. They're not. And everything that is happening today, particularly with fisheries, because we must get on with how we're going to develop our wind farm section. But that's going to have an impact. And on the same day, Minister, and I need to bring it up, and unfortunately it's more of a localised issue, but that evening I introduced you to Captain Phil Murphy, who works on behalf of Wexford County Council over our harbours. I asked where our health and safety audit was of the harbour in Duncannon. Nothing has happened. It's as if it was never requested. 4 times I've met with the fishermen in Duncannon, very busy men whose schedule doesn't lend to having mass meetings of all the fishermen to meet officials, let alone TDs. But the reality is that we compiled a list of things that were required in the harbour on a health and safety basis. Twice I've emailed your department and yourself of near-death experiences. Thankfully, they weren't death. There were accidents that resulted in the jet skiers being saved. But it could have easily been 2 fatalities. But not one thing, not one question, not one thing has happened, nor has it been addressed in any manner. There is now an email that I have seen from the harbour master to a representative of the fishermen, telling them that some monies that were provided by the department are at risk of being lost because the fishermen are in some way haven't turned up to a meeting. Minister, I will take it up with you, but I don't want to be putting things like this on the floor of the Dáil. But it is, unfortunately, the only way it seems that we can get our public servants to do what's required of them on a local basis, that actually is what these fishermen require at a local level. Because what's happening here today and discussing EU legislation, I believe, is probably beyond the powers that we will stop it happening. And therefore, I think we need to be able to look after them and where be it compensate them where we can at local level. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. That concludes second stage discussions on the Sea-Fisheries Miscellaneous Provisions Bill. I now invite the Minister to respond. Minister.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and I'd like at the outset to thank all the deputies for the many and varied contributions as part of the second stage of the bill here this evening. I certainly think that in the main there is a very strong understanding and commitment in the Oireachtas for the need for a timely introduction of an implementation of an effective, proportionate and dissuasive Masters point system that will work well. It's an important measure, Cathaoirleach, to support a level playing field on control and support sustainable fishing in compliance with the rules of the waters around Ireland, in which our fishing fleet is very strongly dependent. As deputies will be aware, fishing industry representatives raised certain concerns around SI 318/2020 as regards the licence holders' points system when it was signed into force in August 2020. It's understandable these concerns would arise again, given the similarities between the procedures adopted under that SI and those under the proposed under this bill. I want to touch on the issue of standard of proof, which was something which a number of deputies raised. In relation to that, the standard of proof to be used by the determination panel and by the appeals officer is to be on the balance of probabilities, and that has been something that's been raised by a number this evening, and also was raised in the context of pre-legislative scrutiny as well. The legal standard beyond a reasonable doubt is almost entirely confined to criminal trials and is not applicable to proceedings of a civil nature, where the standard used is the balance of probabilities. This is the standard that is used for the point system, and the legal position is that it is the appropriate legal standard here. The legal position further is that the Supreme Court did not, in either Craden or O'Sullivan cases, in which a forerunner to SI 318/2020 was challenged successfully, make a single reference to beyond a reasonable doubt. It wasn't part of that at all throughout the 2 judgments. The Supreme Court had no issue with the balance of probability standard of proof in any of the SIs it considered. Thus, there is no support in the Supreme Court judgments for the proposition that the standard of proof balance of probability should be raised to the criminal standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. With regard to the issue of points being removed following finding of not guilty in the courts, the issue of points being removed where the master is found not guilty in criminal proceedings in respect of the infringement has been raised both here and the pre-legislative scrutiny stage. This proposal would involve both systems being interlinked, and they would not stand alone from each other, as in the criminal approach and the administrative approach, which is the one that is based on, or the penalty points is based on. There are separate systems involving separate standards of proof between the points and the criminal prosecution. It would lead to the confusion and conflation of evidence and render elements inadmissible. In addition, the legal position is that points under EU regulation are intended as additional to a criminal prosecution. That's the legal position. They're intended under EU regulation as being additional to a criminal prosecution. Accordingly, it could not be argued that Ireland has both a criminal and point system as required under EU regulation if we operated that system in a manner whereby the criminal proceedings completely eclipsed the point system. So this is something that's been given a lot of consideration at all stages, not just now, but in relation to the penalty points SI in relation to the owners of a ship and teased out in great detail. And it's simply not possible for us to become compliant with the EU regulation were we to do that. With regard to the right to a full rehearing before the High Court, it has also been suggested that the Master should have a full right to a rehearing before the High Court by a number of deputies, and indeed in previous debates as well. And the legal position is that under the Constitution, the High Court has full original jurisdiction and can hear all matters of law brought before it. The legal position is that it would be highly anomalous, if not unprecedented, to provide such a full High Court rehearing of a matter first governed by the procedures which were set down in the 2020 statutory instrument for licence holders and in the Bill for Masters. In addition, it would delay the application of points, which would run up against the timeline set down in EU regulation. Apply for 3 years with a commencement date of the date of detection. To that extent, it would hinder the effective implementation of this EU law and would not meet Ireland's obligations to implement these EU provisions. Again, compliance, as is the requirement on us under EU law and regulation, and in which we are the sole remaining member state within the Common Fisheries Policy not to yet have applied this. The High Court retains a supervisory and review capacity which provides for an appeal on a point of law to the High Court, which is entirely in keeping with the statutory review and appeals procedures of this nature. Accordingly, the legal position is that while the High Court retains the constitutional authority to enjoy full original jurisdiction over any legal proceedings, this authority has been circumscribed by the specific appeals mechanism set down in the primary and secondary legislation, which overwhelmingly limit High Court appeals to reviews on a point of law. I wish to address also a claim made by the opposition yesterday at second stage to the fact that if a master successfully appeals to the High Court on a point of law, then points would nevertheless remain assigned to him or her, and indeed which was made by a number of deputies again today, and indeed is something which I've corrected on numerous occasions up until now, but people choose not to take on board the points and absorb the points that I've made in relation to that. So just to be clear once again, that is not correct. It's not correct. The legal position is that if a High Court challenge is successful on a point of law, then the Court may take the appropriate order, may make the appropriate order, quashing any earlier decision to assign points. This is entirely independent of the separate provision in the Bill that points assigned to a master remain assigned regardless of any criminal proceedings pending or the outcome of any such proceedings in respect of the serious infringement concerned. On the issue of a points on conviction model, to tease that out further, fishing industry representatives have pointed out that prior to Brexit, the United Kingdom operated a system for its licence holders whereby points would only be applied following a conviction in the courts for the serious infringement concerned. It has been queried why this model could not be adopted in Ireland for the Masters point system. The Supreme Court delivered its judgments in relation to SI number 3 of 2014 in December 2017. Those judgments found in favour of the State's position that for licence holders it is permissible to have a standalone point system separate to a prosecution through the courts, and that it is permissible to provide for the standalone system pursuant to a statutory instrument. The Supreme Court judgment makes it clear that one of the obvious purposes behind the EU regulations is to ensure that the system of sanctions and dissuasive measures designed to disincentivise illegal fishing is that the system should operate efficiently and without undue delay. It's also clear from the judgment that the Court understands that criminal prosecutions could take at least 2 years, making the points for licence holders ineffective in many cases because they lapse 3 years after deduction, or detection, I should say. The legal position is that it is not possible to deliver on an effective and dissuasive point system by assigning points upon successful prosecution. For instance, a delay in the prosecution of an offence could render the assignment of points meaningless, as points must be backdated to commence on the date of detection of the serious infringement and expire 3 years after that date. So we all know from observing the weekly situations in courts and the types of cases we see and the time that can take, how that simply would be ineffective and wouldn't be a system that would work, and how we wouldn't be in compliance with meeting the EU regulations around that. Whereas the Supreme Court judgments related to the licence holder system, it is considered that the Court's analysis applied equally in the context of the Master's point system provided for in the Bill, given the intention therein to replicate the existing licence holder system insofar as is possible and necessary, including in relation to the lapse of points 3 years after detection. To touch on other amendments to licence holders' points SI number 31828 previously proposed by the industry. In addition to the above main issues which we've just discussed, industry also raised previously the following proposed amendments in the context of the licence holders' points SI 31820. Firstly, that the Attorney-General should establish and regulate the determination panel, and that members of the determination panel be removed, resign, by or via the Attorney-General's office. That was a proposed amendment. So the attribution of points for serious infringements as required under EU regulations is firstly an operational issue. The Attorney-General's constitutional role as the government's legal advisor is incompatible with this suggestion, therefore, and accordingly it's not possible and wasn't possible to accept it. A second concern raised in respect of the proposal is that the Attorney-General were to establish, if the Attorney-General were to establish the determination panel, he would be discharging just part of the duties set out at Article 125A of Commission Implementing Regulation 404/2011, namely the setting up of the system for the attribution of points under Article 92 of the Control Regulation. Noting that SI 318 of 2020 has left the Minister as the body who appoints the appeals officer, the legal position is that the proposed amendment effectively subdivides the responsibilities set out at Article 125A, a course which isn't congruent with the text of that article. The legal position is that the Attorney-General would have to set up the entire point system if he is to set up or regulate the determination panel. So next I want to touch on the proposed amendment that the Minister, as opposed to the SFPA, appoints the determination panel. Again, the SI provides for the establishment by the SFPA of a determination panel comprised of 3 independent legal professionals nominated by the Attorney-General to determine if, on the balance of probabilities, a serious infringement of the rules of the Common Fisheries Policy occurred. The SFPA only makes an appointment of named legal professionals nominated by the Attorney-General's office. It has no role whatsoever in the nominating process, in the nomination process. The legal position is that it would not be advisable to permit the Minister, rather than the SFPA, to appoint the determination panel. To touch on a further point, which is to add the wording and not minor in nature, giving due regard to all the facts of the case. Another proposal, an amendment which was considered. And this proposed suggestion is in relation to the appeals officer, confirming that the point shall be assigned where he or she considers if the alleged serious infringement involved an infringement that was serious. The serious infringement referred to is already defined in the 2020 SI. The legal position is that this amendment confuses EU law and Irish law, as well as civil law and criminal law, and the difference between serious and non-minor offences in Irish law. The two standards referred to are entirely different, and the amendment serves only to confuse the issue. Accordingly, this proposal wasn't accepted in the context of SI 318/2020 as regards the licence holders' point system. Two amendments which were accepted and incorporated into the licence holders' point system and the bill are as follows. Firstly, an oral hearing in all circumstances at both the termination panel stage and appeal stage, and the SI of 318/2020 and the bill indeed today provides that an oral hearing must be granted if the applicant so wishes at both the determination panel and appeals officer stages. Secondly, proposals to increase certain timescales in the SI 89/2018. For example, we're talking here about that the licence holder would be given 30 working days as distinct from 10, which had been suggested previously, to make submissions to the determination panel, and that an application to the High Court could be made no later than 28 working days, again as distinct from 18 days, after relevant notification. SI 318/2020 and the bill today provides that the licence holder shall have the opportunity to make submissions in writing to the determination panel and the appeals officer within 30 working days from the date of the relevant notification. I want to discuss now briefly the application of points to third country vessels. Fishing industry representatives have also expressed concern regarding the non-application of points to third country vessels, which of course now includes UK vessels post-Brexit. This issue also arose at pre-legislative scrutiny stage and was mentioned by some deputies in the debate here at second stage. The bill provides that an official can prepare a report regarding an alleged serious infringement involving a foreign sea fishing boat in the exclusive fishery limits of the state or an Irish sea fishing boat, wherever it may be. The person who is alleged to be the master of the boat concerned must be an Irish citizen or a national of another member state. So points cannot be assigned to a third country master, e.g. a UK master, notwithstanding the fact that third country vessels do fish in the exclusive fishery limits of the state. This is because the master's point system is an EU scheme deriving exclusively from EU law, and so can only apply to masters who are Irish citizens or a national of another member state. It's not open to the Minister to make the EU master system applicable to third country masters. To touch on other issues raised at pre-legislative scrutiny stage by the Joint Oireachtas Committee. Firstly, in relation to the Joint Committee call to support and resource the implementation of the recommendations of the PwC review of the organisational capacity of the SFPA, and their view that it was imperative that penalty points for masters of vessels be applied in the context of a robust and fair system of fisheries control, and that the lack of any capacity at present within the SFPA must not affect the constraining, must not have the effect of constraining the activities of the fisheries sector. In relation to that, I want to outline that the SFPA is implementing the recommendations in an independent review of the organisational capability of the SFPA carried out in 2019, which was completed by PricewaterhouseCoopers. The principal objective of the review was to contribute to the ongoing future development of the SFPA. The review concentrates very much on the organisational capacities of the SFPA to deliver on its mission for the effective and fair regulation of the sea fishing and seafood sectors that fall within its mandate. As Minister, I am satisfied that the SFPA is committed to delivering on the recommendations of the review report, which, when implemented, will address issues identified to improve the effectiveness of the organisation. Responsibility for implementation of the recommendations do rest with the SFPA, which, as you know, is an independent agency under the 2006 Act. To conclude, Cathaoirleach, this bill is necessary to protect law-abiding operators who make up the vast majority of those in our industry, and to preserve this precious and valuable resource for all fishermen and for future generations. I am confident that the new points system provided for under the bill will play a vital role in delivering on the common fisheries policy objective of ensuring proportionate, effective and dissuasive penalties for serious infringements, and contributing to a level playing field in the fisheries sector and fisheries sector control across member states. The point system is necessary as an effective measure against the small number of operators, either foreign or Irish, who would break the rules. And it's necessary to protect law-abiding operators and protect fish stocks. I have no doubt that all sides of the House will appreciate that the bill is a vital piece of legislation which requires full scrutiny in its passage through the Oireachtas, and accordingly I am grateful to deputies for their considered contributions at second stage yesterday and today, and look forward to more detailed scrutiny of the provisions of the bill at committee stage in the near future. Thank you, Cahill.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes the second stage of the bill. I must now put the question that the bill be read a second time. Is that agreed? That's agreed. Thank you.
Not agreed.
Not agreed. Okay. The deputies in favour say Tá. Minister McConaughey. The deputies against say Neil. Neil. I believe the question is carried. Okay. As a vote has been called, the division is deferred until the weekly division next week.